All right, my friends, welcome back to the Reisinger build. You know, we've been building this house start to finish for you, trying to show you the entire process. But on today's episode, we're gonna get into the weeds. We're gonna get into the minutia. We're talking specifically about air tightness, penetration, how to seal up the house. Before I jump into all those specifics of what we actually did, let's talk about the concept first real quick. You know, my buddy Steve Basic has a great analogy that I really like. He says, you know, if you were in a car traveling down the highway and you had a window that wouldn't go all the way up on the car, how annoying would that be? You'd have a hard time keeping the air conditioner cold enough on a hot summer day. You'd probably get some bugs flying in occasionally because that window is down. You want to take that car back to the dealership and say, hey, fix it. My window doesn't quite go all the way up. It's an inch short. But yet in our houses, we say, oh, houses need to breathe. That's totally bogus. Houses do not need to breathe. We want to build our house as tight as possible so we can gain control. And on this episode, I'm going to show you how we've gotten really good control over this house. And then if you go back and watch our mechanical episode, once we're able to gain that control, that's when we can bring fresh air into the house on our terms with a very specific fresh air system that's going to filter the air, that's going to reject the humidity from the outside, and make sure that we've got really fresh, really clean, dehumidified indoor air quality. With that being said, this is the air tightness episode of the Reisinger build in partnership with our friends at Builders First Source, but this episode specifically we're going to be using, and we're sponsored by a lot of products from Prosoco. Let's get going.
A Build Original series in partnership with Builders First Source. The Reisinger build.
Okay, so this episode I think starts with remembering what we've got from the framing. Remember when we framed the walls on this house and we framed them up so that actually the roof touched the wall sheathing? That's a really important concept here because that sets us up for really good air tightness from the beginning. Now we left a little bit of our soffit off right here so that you could actually see that roof to wall transition. And I want you to remember, we don't have any rafters poking through. Like most houses, when you set the walls, your rafters actually come through that wall sheathing and sit on top of that top plate. But in this case, all our rafters, all our trusses were clipped so that none of them go to the outside. So like here in this garage right behind me, you'll notice all these trusses stop right there at that wall sheathing. And now that wall to roof transition, we can tape that joint and perfectly air seal that. So we're starting off from a basis of really good air tightness. Another detail I want to remind you of from the framing side was used on top of the concrete slab before our sill sealer went down. So we put a bead down, we put our sill sealer down, and then we put our bottom, then we put another bead on top of that, and then we put our bottom plate, so that I've got this bead of Lexel sealant underneath and on top of my sill sealer, which makes that transition basically from framing to concrete a really tight detail to start with. Now we're gonna do a belt and suspenders approach here, but we're wanting this house before the trades that come to be very, very tight. And in fact, we did a pre-blower door test before the trades came. All of my windows were set, the whole pellet package was in the house. We took this door right here, which we're in the garage, to the inside. We took this off and we replaced this with our blower door, and we got a really nice score. We blew a .38 ACH 50 score on our blower door, which meant that our envelope before the trades came was really, really tight. Now here's one thing that we really want to make sure. When our trades come, there's something we're telling everybody on the job site, and I want you to repeat this mantra on your job sites in the future. Every time we make a hole, we only want one thing to go into that hole. Jake Bruton taught me this years ago, and this is a best practice that's going to lead to a really tight house. You can see a great example of it right over here in the garage, where Rick, the electrician, drilled all his holes through this wall. Remember, this is the wall between the kitchen and the garage, and if you look up, this wall goes all the way up continuously. We framed this with we sheathed this rather with zip system sheathing, which is our air barrier, before we framed the garage. So now all those holes up there, every time a hole was drilled, just one wire goes through that. So then we could use a product like Prosoco's Fast Flash or maybe Huber's Liquid Flash to really caulk around that on the outside. Spray foam does an okay job, but I don't like relying on canned spray foam. I'll use that as a backup, but I want my primary to be something like those fluid applied products that you're seeing up there. Those mean that now all those holes coming through are going to be really nicely air sealed. And on this episode, as we talk about air sealing, I want you to also think in your mind, when I seal against air, I'm also sealing against bugs. You know, my clients, I'm going to have a hard time convincing them that they really need an airtight house, but it's going to be really easy to have a discussion about why we want to spend a little time and effort on bug sealing in our houses, especially in Texas where we have lots of nasty bugs, including a lot of roaches. So think about that as you're walking around the house with me. With that being said, let's actually walk to this side of the building and we're going to look at some of the other places where we penetrated the building. Okay, y'all, quick sidebar. I thought I'd make this clear because it's not always apparent when you're on the job site. We used a bunch of different products, a bunch of different caulkings. Let me take a quick second and run you through the Prosoco catalog of what I used on this particular project and also a couple things that I didn't use that you might want to use on a future project. So first off, the pink fluid that you're seeing on basically everywhere the framing hit the concrete foundation, we use this stuff. This is called Prosoco's R-Guard Joint and Seam Filler. The R-Guard is the family name. The Joint and Seam Filler is the actual product. This pink product is a fluid applied that has a fibrous material in it. And this is meant to be at joints and gaps and seams. So for instance, if I was gonna eliminate my zip tape where my joints would come together on plywood, I would go in and use this. I could even use a pretty cool thing like this ribbon nozzle on that. The reason why I like this in particular, where the foundation meets the framing, is if there's any movement in that joint or there's any gaps, this will span those gaps. Now, if you have a bigger gap, you don't want to just caulk this in. You want to use a little bit of spray foam first as basically like a backer rod, and then you'd shave that spray foam flush, and then you could use this joint and seam over it. So I really like this product. I also want to point out that this product is pink. The next product that I used a lot is red. This one is called R-Guard, again, the family, and this particular one is Fast Flash, and you're going to see this is called the gun grade version. Same basic viscosity as the pink stuff, but this one's real smooth. It comes out like almost like a really nice cake frosting. There's no fibers in this, and they make it in two different viscosities. They also sell it by the bucket over here, and this one is called Fast Flash Roller Grade. You'll see that on the bucket. So we could actually use a roller on this. It's a little more fluid. It's a little less viscous. This is thicker. One thing that I really like about Prosoco is they color code everything. So pink, the joint and seam, this is what you would use first. The red is not meant to span big gaps. This would be like if we're flashing a window. And in fact, I used this on a couple windows in the project in the back of the house where I had exterior insulation. I went ahead and used Fast Flash gun grade. It guns out and then we strike it down with a Bondo type scraper, and it really is very satisfying to use. So that one's pink, this one's red. Now, as another point that's not related to Prosoco, you saw on the job a lot of gray fluid applied. That is a product that's from Huber that looks and acts and feels a lot like this. Very similar products, super well made. They're, in my mind, they're basically interchangeable. That's called Fast Flash. They sell it in the tube like this. They sell it in cartridge guns, all the flavors. These two are very interchangeable in my mind. And zip system sheathing is intended to be the perfect surface to stick both their tape, and it's the perfect surface to stick these fluid applieds to. Lastly, what we didn't use on the project is this right here. Again, this is part of the R-Guard system, but this is called Cat 5. If you were doing a building where you didn't have Huber zip, let's say you were using the Huber high-grade OSB, or you wanted to use 3/4 plywood so your masons could put an anchor anywhere, you could use these families of products. You'd start with the pink on the joint and seams, then you'd flash the windows of the red. The main body of the building would be this right here. This is a roller grade, and they also sell it in a spray grade. Hopefully I remember that correctly. And I've been to job sites before with that. My buddy Travis Brungart is doing one right now. I was at one in Dallas not long ago. It makes for a bomber exterior. It feels like you've bedlinered, so to speak, the whole outside of the building, one continuous layer. But I just wanted to kind of point that out so you kind of understood where those products were and why I chose what for different parts of the building. Lastly, another product from these guys, also part of the R-Guard family. This is called Air Dam. This is intended for that joint on the inside of the window installation that connects the window to the jamb. Now, on those jambs in the back of the house, and that's called liquid flash from Huber, this red fluid applied. Other places in the house, we actually brought the zip system into the inside, but I finished it off with the entire house, front door, windows, sliding door, everything, with this air dam. This is a terrific product. This is specifically intended to air seal between a window and a jamb that has a fluid applied or a zip system on it. So I thought I'd take a quick minute to explain that, and then I don't know if we showed it in the video or not. All of these products that are come in these sausage tubes get installed with a gun like this. This is really common in the commercial world, becoming more and more common in the residential world. You basically just drop your sausage tube in, poke the top of that with a nail just to get it started, and then as you gun this out, it comes out beautifully. So let's jump back to the video on the outside. Okay, so next up, in terms of air sealing, I told you about how we use that Lexel between the foundation and the bottom plate of framing. That's an area that I really like to double up. I want a belt on and I want to wear suspenders. So if you look up underneath the siding throughout the whole house, you're gonna see this band of pink. That's a product by Prosoco called Joint and Seam Filler. It's basically the same fluid applied that we've used in other places. The pink, though, means that it's got a fiber in it. If you look closely on it, it kind of looks a little rough and bumpy. And that's because they've put some fiber in the mix, which allows it to expand and contract. It also allows it to bridge some bigger gaps. They tell you can actually bridge up to a 3/4 inch gap with that product. Now, you'd want to use foam or a backer rod before you did that. But the whole idea is we've used that around the entire house on that critical joint between the foundation and the framing. And then from there up, you see we've switched to, let's say, zip tape on our seams, or where we've got other penetrations, we've also used it. So like right here where I've got this, I think that is an exhaust from my kitchen vent right there, or maybe that's the makeup for the kitchen vent, where that pipe is coming through, that metal pipe. Before we put the siding on, we made sure that every one of those penetrations had a nice bead of Prosoco's joint and seam filler around it. That's that pink caulking. Now later, when we go to finish that, the HVAC guy will cut that tape off. It's taped over right now. And then our hood that goes on there actually slides into the pipe. I'm a big fan of Seho grills, but there's lots of manufacturers out there. The point is the metal that's galvanized is coming through. We're air sealing to the metal, and then that hood will get applied later. We did the same thing for all of our wires around the house as well. So if you're looking at a wire on the outside, for instance, same detail that we talked about before, one thing for one hole. Let's walk around the side of the house, and I'm gonna show you what we did for HVAC penetration. So walk with me this way. Okay, so now we can actually see it a little better here because we haven't put our foam or our siding back here. This is that joint and seam filler. And you can see we actually did a blue tape job on this. So little blue tape across and on the foundation. And then we did a real nice job of getting the underside here. If you were to look underneath here, you can see they've done a real nice job, especially on that cut raw edge of OSB on that zip sheathing. We want to make sure that that's totally protected. And then that same one thing for one hole goes for our HVAC system. So our line set here, the supply and the return on the Freon line, the control wire, one hole for each one of those. And then this happens to be the gray material you're seeing here is called Zip System Liquid Flash. Pretty similar product to the pink. Again, the wire that's going to provide the power for that. It's a little hard to tell, but this electrical outlet has that sealed back there as well. All of these areas back here have been fully sealed, and we did a real nice job of making sure before these guys came. Now, we did a post-mechanical blower door test as well in this house. We had a couple of unsealed holes that weren't quite perfect, and we blew like a 0.69 or a 0.70 on the blower door. It's sure nice having your own blower door. If you don't have one, highly recommend you get one so you can verify where you're at. If we wait to do a blower door test at the very end of the job, I think that it's really hard to fix things, but if you do it during construction, you can see where your mistakes are being made. So long story short, by really detailing all those penetrations, we're basically at or right near passive house standards, and we don't even have drywall on the inside of the house. Now, speaking of drywall, let's actually go inside, and I'm going to point out a couple of special details on the inside as well. I'll meet you in there. Actually, before we walk in, I just want to point out, my guys did a real nice job of walking around and double checking anything that's penetrating. They really did a nice job of making sure that we got that liquid flash on all those wires. Come on in, y'all. Okay, so we're walking through the kitchen into the family room area now, and I wanted to show you the back side of a few of those things where we just were a minute ago. So this 2x6 wall right here had that zip system sheathing on the back side. This is standard zip, not zip R like the rest of the house, because we've got 3 inches of Atlas insulation on the back side. It's a little hard to tell right here, but this is a good one to show. You can see these individual wires. We drilled holes for those, drilled an individual wire for the pipe, and then drilled individual holes down here for the line sets. It's really critical to look on both the inside and the outside. And one little tip or trick you can use is if it's real bright outside, turn the lights off inside and see if you can see any daylight. Another way to do it is to have someone outside with a flashlight and do that. And then a third way to do it is actually to fog the house under construction. You can learn a lot of things by using some theatrical fog. I went out to a job site with my buddy Jesse with the Homestead Builders out in Brenham, Texas, and we brought our fog machine and our blower door, and really well done house, but there was 1 or 2 minor areas where we saw fog coming out on that house from the inside. Basically, we pressurized the house with the blower door, made the house look like it was on fire with so much fog. Tell the neighbors you're doing this, by the way, because it does look like it's on fire. And then we looked for any areas where it was coming out, and we found a couple of minor spots. One place, though, that we tend to find a lot of is fireplaces. I can remember a job that I went to a couple years ago where we did a fog test, and I was shocked that it looked like there was a fire in the fireplace. There was so much coming out of the flue. I went inside, looked up into the flue. You know, they've got a metal flue a lot of times in those metal fireboxes, and it was shut, but yet there was a ton of air leaking out of that fireplace. It's one of the big reasons why we eliminated the fireplace on this house. There's a giant fireplace going on the outside of this house. You can see the footing that we put in place for that. And that's pretty much what I did on my house as well. You know, I feel like if you're in the South, I understand the nostalgia of a fireplace and having maybe grown up with one and wanting one, but really from a building science and an indoor air quality perspective and an efficiency perspective, I just don't think that indoor fireplaces have a place in a home in the South. And if you're doing one in the North, you really need to consider a sealed combustion fireplace. You know, they use them all through Europe where there's a fresh air pipe that comes just into the box. Your logs in the box, there's a latch that tightens it down from an air perspective. So you just have this contained fire in the box. I'd highly recommend you think about one of those units if you do want a fireplace. Traditional fireplaces, almost every metal fireplace box I've ever seen, incredibly leaky, and I'm not a fan of those. I've certainly done them for clients, but we didn't want to do it on this house. Remember, we were going for a high performance house on as much of a reasonable budget as possible on this project. And I think that we've really achieved that. I gotta say, I'm really proud of the results we've got here. This is a very well-built house, but we definitely thought about the details and said, hey, how could we dial it back on cost to get us a high-performing house, but to do it on a more modest budget than we've done in the past. Guys, thanks for joining us on this air tightness episode. Hopefully you learned something. Trust me, if you blower door test your houses and you do some of these same principles like I've learned from Jake, one thing for one hole, you do a good job air sealing, consider doing monopoly framing that sets you up right from the beginning, you're gonna build some really tight houses, and that's gonna lead to houses with dramatically less bugs. It's gonna lead to houses that don't have condensation in the walls from air leaking in and depositing that condensation, which leads to a much more healthy home. It's gonna lead to happy clients. And you're really gonna be proud of your results, especially if you can see how you've made every house just a little bit better. You tightened up each one a little bit tighter than the last one. This is a really important goal. And lastly, I'll leave you with by saying, You know, if you're building houses that are below 1 ACH50, that's an amazing goal, and I'm really proud of you. You're in the top 0.0001% of the homes in America being built this year if you can build a house that's below 1 ACH50 on the blower door test. Big thanks to our friends at Builders First Source for sponsoring this series. If you haven't seen, go check out other videos. We were able to build with them this house on the computer using their digital tools and really dial in the mechanicals and make sure everything was going to work. The framing process was incredibly fast. And I also want to thank our friends at Prosoco for sponsoring this episode. They make some terrific fluid applied products. They also have a bunch of other things that you may not know about. For instance, they're big in the masonry cleaning and restoration world. They're a really neat company, and I've really liked working with their products over the years. Guys, catch up on the latest episodes. Otherwise, we'll see you next time on the Reisinger Build.